Hi everybody, Dr. Nick here. I just finished recording another episode of The Hospitality Spirit. My guest today was Anders Justenlund, an associate professor at the University College of Northern Denmark. Anders is a perfect example of what we look for in higher education as someone who's passionate and bridges the gap between industry and academia. During our conversation, we covered a wide variety of topics, including things that make the hospitality and tourism industry of Denmark unique, and some suggestions for faculty on how to continuously develop themselves professionally. I hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, everybody. And for our guest, it's good afternoon. This is Dr. Nick Thomas with the Hospitality Spirit podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by a longtime friend, hospitality educator extraordinaire, Anders Justenlund. Anders is an associate professor at University College of Northern Denmark. I am excited to have him. Anders, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Lovely to be here. I've been listening to all the podcasts that you've been doing until now, so very honored to be here and be part of it myself.
As they say, you're a longtime listener, first-time caller.
Exactly.
Anders, why don't you give people just a real high-level overview of the University College of Northern Denmark, kind of what your role is as an associate professor there?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm from University College of Northern Denmark, which is a university of applied science in Denmark. And again, as you mentioned, I'm an associate professor, but I think I'm a little bit sort of a non-classical professor, as you would know them from other universities, because I do quite a lot of different things in my day-to-day work. Of course, I do a lot of teaching and I do some research and development projects, but especially the last part with our development projects is something that sort of takes me quite a lot out of the classroom and makes sort of form the foundation for me to engage a lot with the industry, of course, and with my students in different scenarios that we do.
That's exciting.
So that was the very short version of it.
About 2 years ago, I was very fortunate to be able to, on a swing through Europe, make my way up to your college up in Denmark. For those that are listening that maybe have not had a chance to experience Denmark and specifically Aalborg, where you're located, maybe lay the foundation a little bit about Aalborg, Denmark, and what makes it so special there along the river, kind of on the northern part of the country.
I think I'll start with Denmark because we are a very, very small country. I think a lot of US people know who we are because we tend to sort of pop up in news media in the US once in a while when you have political discussions. Otherwise, people think we are sort of the capital of IKEA or something like that. I would say we are a very, very small country. We're only 5.5 million people in population, and our longest domestic flight is 30 minutes. So very, very, let's say the opposite of the US, basically. For that sense, I'm in the sort of northern part. Aalborg is the fourth largest city in Denmark, and I would say we have a population of 200,000, and that's the greater Aalborg area. So you can see sort of the differences in sizes here. However, Aalborg is a very, very interesting city when it comes to sort of tourism and hospitality. And I think that's the reason why we have such a great university college up here. And we actually have quite a lot of students in our programs compared to how, let's say, few people in a context in the US, for example, that we are. I would also say it's a sort of a very unknown. I think most people would know Copenhagen for sure in one way or another. But when you mention Aalborg, well, I can go to the UK, for example, which is basically our neighbor country, and people won't know what Aalborg is. So it's a bit of let's say, a challenge once in a while when you're out promoting our international programs and some of the things that we do on an international scale.
Sure. So the college there it probably is one of the more beautiful facilities that I've seen. Lovely common area right there, grand foyer. Where students can kind of congregate. But you mentioned this idea of it's an applied sciences, and this is a concept that you see quite often throughout
Mm,
Europe, and it's not really
yeah.
a term that we use to describe hospitality programs in the United States. What does that mean, applied sciences, and how might that differ from other higher education institutes or institutions within Denmark, but also Europe as a whole?
I'm glad you asked. Actually, in Denmark and most part of Europe, we sort of differentiate between what we call primary universities, which are your classical universities. That would be University of Sorbonne or Copenhagen University in for a Scandinavian context. However, a University of Applied Science is actually based on sort of more, well, that's in the name, right? Applied sciences. So we focus much more on the use of knowledge that is created and generated, whereas primary universities would be very much research focused in a
Hmm.
theoretical sense. So I would say our most important task is to take some of this fundamental research and then translate that into something that you can use in a practical context. And that is basically what, and mainly what we focus on for our students, our graduates. They should be ready to work in industry in a very short period of time and be fully fledged professionals. So,
Sure.
so it's very, very important for us actually to take sort of both the theoretical side from a research perspective and combine that with a practical industry context. And that's what
Hmm.
we try to sort of combine at our institution. I can say we have a learning philosophy at UCN called reflective practice learning. So we basically, by reflecting on the practice that we do, we become better and we learn more.
That's interesting. In terms of the demographic profile, are most of the students that are are attending UCN, are they local to Aalborg? Are they coming in throughout Denmark? Are they coming in throughout Europe? Do you have quite a lot of students from outside of Europe attending? And then a follow up to that is where then are your students going upon graduation? Are most of them staying locally to help support the tourism and hospitality infrastructure in Aalborg and Denmark, or are they branching out to other countries?
I'm glad you asked. As you mentioned, we have quite a lot of students compared to the size of Aalborg, for example. That's because in northern Denmark, it's really sort of it's a rural part of Denmark as well. So we have quite a lot of coastal tourism up here, and of course, tourism have been sort of a main trait for northern Denmark. And this is something that we see. We actually start to see quite a lot of people coming in from Copenhagen. They come from Aarhus, which is a couple of hours south of Aalborg, and then they come in and study tourism and hospitality and service management in our programs because it's sort of literally a part of it. It's a part of our DNA in Aalborg.
Hmm.
Uh, in the later years, we also see sort of a growing cruise industry coming in.
Interesting.
So the last, I would say, 5 years ago, we had maybe one cruise ship every second year, and now we have 49 cruise ships coming in yearly.
Wow. That's
So you can see it's really been booming. Aalborg is this sort of a classical sense. It's an old working town. Um, we have had heavy industry. We have had shipbuilding, ship warps. We have focused on concrete. We focused on all of these classical heavy, I would say, black industries,
mhm,
basically, with quite heavy polluting industries. And now we've been sort of for the past 20 years transformed into a more sort of cultural city and a knowledge based city where we're lucky to have, well, we have UCN, of course, as one of our main institutions, but we also have a primary university called Aalborg University, which have sort of transformed Aalborg from an industry heavy city to a knowledge city to sort of a clear university city where we see a lot of digital web development. We see quite a lot of development into satellites and things like that. So it's starting to become more sort of tech
mhm.
focused and tech development heavy.
Do you run the
So
risk
so
that if that happens, though, that you start to lose the thing that made Aalborg special? We see examples of the negative impacts of rapid tourism growth and being able to sustain that. I mean, to go from one or two cruise ships to over 40 cruise
mm,
ships in just a couple of year period. Can the infrastructure of Aalborg adapt to that? Specifically, the hospitality infrastructure, the restaurants and the
yeah.
hotels, to be able to handle that volume.
I think we've been quite lucky into to that sense, because we have a very proactive city council who sort of really developed the city, and really have had sort of a clear strategy into what we should become, but still based on some of the classical values that Aalborg was built upon. And I like that. One of the great things that we do up here is sort of we take the population of Aalborg, or the citizens of Aalborg, coming in and actually becoming a part of that transformation as well. So
Hmm.
it's something that comes actually quite natural, and we become very proud of our city. I would say it's funny that you mentioned restaurants, because that's been a very important thing to Aalborg actually. Um, we were sort of your classical buffet kind of town. This is where you come in, cheap restaurants, all you can eat buffets and things like that. And within the past 5 to 6 years, we start to see much sort of finer dining coming in. We have a lot of young kids, what I call them. I work together with a lot of chefs in my daily job, so I call them the young kids, because all our chefs up here are under 30.
Hmm.
They've been to Copenhagen. They sort of experienced the boom in Nordic cuisine with the sort of nomad trend that sort of been
Yeah,
branched
exactly.
out, and the entire sort of uh, expansion of Nordic cuisine,
Hmm.
um, and that new sort of, let's see, identity that we have had, that we can actually have fine dining in Scandinavia. Um, and you see a lot of these young chefs who's been working at Michelin star restaurants in Copenhagen, coming back and opening their own restaurants now in Aalborg, and that have actually created some kind of very dynamic scene within new a la carte restaurants, with both formal dining and informal dining,
That's
but
great.
focus on local producers, focus on seasonal menus, and going away from sort of the all you can eat or free dishes for 100 Danish kroner, which is around six, let's say that is around $10, $16 or something like that.
Interesting, interesting. So, in terms of the students that are in your program, are you said a lot of them are focused on culinary? Is that so? Is that how you design the curriculum? Is there a lot of is culinary a huge aspect of your curriculum, or do you have a somewhat balanced curriculum? I know you have casinos in Aalborg.
Mm,
So, in terms of the types of course programming that you have at UCN, how does that kind of roll out?
yeah. Um, Funny thing actually, because now we talked about this applied science perspective that we had. We saw that the in between here, because we still have vocational colleges. So in that sense, we don't have a kitchen on campus, for example. We don't train chefs or waiters in that sense, but we only focus on the management part, and our hospitality and service programs are part of the business faculty. So
Hmm.
it's mainly focused on business development, entrepreneurship, and leadership perspectives.
That's great.
So
That's great.
basically, what we have, and that's the funny thing. You ask, who are these young kids coming in? Um, we get a little bit of sort of from each barrel, if you can say it like that. So we have people who are trained chefs, who have had a vocational training program, attended a vocational training program, coming into us with no sort of more academic background, and then we have people coming in from our equivalents from high schools or business academies, and or junior business schools, and gymnasiums. So that will be sort of junior high, so high school in the equivalents to the US. And
Hmm.
and you sort of see people who come with a more sort of theoretical background, who sort of knows how to study in academia, and you have people coming in at the same time without that background, but who have been trained chef and been working in restaurant for a couple of years, and then figured out, okay, I want to sort of, I need to sort of refresh my toolbox here. I need new
Hmm.
tools if I want to either open my own restaurant, or I want to continue into management instead of working in the kitchen, and so on. And I think actually that's one of the things
That's
that we
great.
sort of really found in that reflective practice learning perspective, is that we have people with a vocational training background, we have people with a more theoretical background, and they actually help each other in their studies when they're at our campus.
That's great. That's great. What, so in terms of you, Anders, I mean, we all have kind of our story about how we got into higher education. I mean, what was What was the catalyst for you that you said, you know what, I'd like to be a teacher. I'd like to help students prepare for their careers in this industry. How did you get involved in higher education?
Funny story actually. So how is something becoming a teacher? Is that something that you would like? Actually, and sorry for laughing. um,
No, sometimes we just
I have
fall
a, I have
into
a,
it. Like
I have a little, yeah, exactly, by
I did an
coincidence.
interview yesterday, and I said it was, where I was working in human resources, and I happened to go into the training area of human resources, and that's how I figured out that I wanted to be
Yeah,
in higher education. So it's everybody's got a unique story in how they got
yeah.
there.
I think the reason why I'm laughing a little bit is that my family background is a family of elementary school teachers.
Mm.
And me and my cousin, I remember we sort of looked at each other when we were young and said, I never ever want to become a teacher. None of us wanted. We've seen the pressure that they've been under. We've seen that we don't want to become our parents, sort of speaking. And funny enough, actually, I started out in press and PR, working for Visit Denmark at their market office in London. And when I got back to Aalborg from London, then I started in higher education.
Mm.
So I was the first to sort of go in and say, well, I'm still not a teacher. I'm actually a university professor. So we sort of that's my sort of little riot to my parents.
Mm.
And funny enough, my cousin today he is an associate professor at the Washington University of Washington in Seattle,
Mm.
teaching Nordic culture. So we ended up in education, both of us, but we traded with higher education. Um, and I must say now I'm here. I actually like it very, very much, and this is what I've been doing for the past 11 years. We actually just had our semester start. Our new students, first year student, came in yesterday, starting in their new in the first year programs. And I think I counted that this is my 11th year of welcoming new students. So there is something here that I like, and that's why I stay here. But I love it, I must admit. And as you mentioned in the introduction, is that I might also be a little bit more sort of one-off kind of associate professor because I do a lot of other things at the same time. I like being out, engaging with the industry. I like being out of the classroom. I love taking my students out of the classroom, and I like sort of trying to do something differently than classical teaching in class, in seat teaching. You got to go out and experience things before you learn it and you remember it, and then we can come back, sit down, and again reflect a little bit about upon the experiences that we have. And I think one of the reasons I'm doing that is because I have some certification in and training in creative new thinking and service design,
Mm.
um, which have helped me quite a lot in my approach to sort of trying to be your non-classical university lecturer, basically.
So explain that. What is the certification in creativity and new thinking for those that aren't familiar? Can you talk a little
Uh,
bit about what that is?
well, basically, it's a way of I would say that we are all creative and we can all become creative new thinkers. It's all about figuring out how we come up with new ideas. So I believe, as for example, if we want to run 5 kilometers, if we train for that, we will be able to run 5 kilometers. If we train even harder, we will be able to run it even faster, right?
Hmm.
And let your brain is a muscle as well, and you got to train that. So you got to train the perspective into looking at new ideas and trying to sort of use all of your common experiences that you have had in your life and try to put that in to your mindset and dig up past experiences that might be something that you can use in a current situation. So, as you know, you might actually go out once in a while and go on a treadmill or run or go on a bike ride and or just do gardening or other types of manual labor. Um, and suddenly you might come up with a good idea because you're focusing on something else. So when you
Hmm.
loosen up your mindset, it's easier for you to come up with new ideas than if you focus very hard on that specific thing. For example, if I tell you don't think of an elephant right now, you will be focusing on that elephant right away, and that sort of starts to narrow your perspective. But when you
Hmm.
start to open up again and don't think of the elephant and forget about the elephant, then you start to open up your mindset again, and you will be able to be more sort of um, ready to take in new inputs that can generate new ideas to a problem that you're working with or challenge that you're working with. If you could say it in your daily life, you might have been, I think we all experience that we have been in a discussion with a colleague or family or something like that. And then on our way back after the discussion, and we say, oh, damn, I didn't know what to say in that specific situation. But when we bike back home or whatever we do, then suddenly it pops up, this is what I should have said.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's because we start in the pressured situation. You start to focus narrowly on one thing, and then when you start to lose up again, oh, suddenly you can see things from other perspectives, and then come with the right argument. It's the same with ideas.
It's interesting because this idea of opening kind of your mind and disconnecting from work to really spur
Mm,
creativity. I think that speaks a lot to one of the things that I've always respected about you. And I'm not sure if it's a personal philosophy for you or this is more of a Danish cultural thing. Is this idea of work life balance
yeah,
that you when you go off the grid, for lack of a better term, because it's you're focusing on your personal well being and your family. That's an incredibly important thing to you. Is that something unique to you? Is that something that's embedded in the Danish culture? Talk a little bit about this idea of work life balance for you.
I believe that's something which is very much embedded in our in a Danish culture. So work-life balance is very, very important to us. So it doesn't make sense for a Dane to just stay long hours at work just to put in the hours, because that's not productive work in any way. So we really have Danes have quite a focus on when we're at work, we are efficient, we are effective in what we're doing, and then when we come back home, then we really sort of unplug, think about the family instead, re-energize for the next day. And well, I think we also work fewer hours than a lot of other colleagues. Our a normal work week in Denmark is 37 hours.
Wow.
But what we are not less productive in any way.
Mhm. How
Um,
does that? So, I mean, you do. You're also a visiting professor, an external professor at the
yeah,
Institut Paul Bocuse in Lyon,
yeah.
and you've taught over in and lectured over in Asia. How does that
Mhm.
this idea of you don't have to necessarily work as long. How does that translate into other cultures? Because as someone who's lived and worked in Asia, that kind of goes against the grain a little bit, and particularly kind of the external consulting work that you do with the hospitality industry. I mean,
Yeah,
we've been when we went to hospitality school and when we worked in the industry, it was, you work as long as it's going to take. And sometimes that's 50, 60 hours a week. So how does that translate? How do you communicate that to other cultures, but also the industry when you're consulting with them?
I think it's about adapting to the cultural context that you're in. And you have to keep in mind, I've been my the beginning of my career was in London, where it's a very different from Danish working conditions as well, and you put in more hours, you work quite a lot. Your people expect a lot from you as well, and I think that this is something that I have brought back with me, that international mindset, and this is something that I bring uh, to different contexts as well. So when I'm in Asia, I try to adapt to that context. When I'm in France, I adapt to another context. When I'm in the UK, I adapt to a third context. And when I'm home, I'm back in my, should we say, natural habitat, and I adapt to my work life balance here. But you also have to remember, when I'm out, it's sort of shorter period of time. It's
Mm,
maximum a week or week and a half, and then I'm back home as well. So again, it's smaller. It's sort of small breaks in my daily work in Denmark.
sure. How, so one of the things that I respect about you and where you and I first kind of connected professionally. was through your engagement in kind of, for lack of a better term, service and getting involved in associations
Mm.
and looking, you mentioned your certification in creativity and new
Yeah.
thinking, but also you're very involved in associations. From an academic perspective, for those that are academics listening, I know there are some professors that are going to be listening to this. What is your recommendation to them about the level of engagement they need to have with associations and the effort they need to do, even if they have a terminal degree? That doesn't mean that they need to stop improving their knowledge, skills, and
Mm.
abilities.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for maybe a junior faculty or someone that, like you, has been doing this for a decade and is kind of mid to later in their career?
I would say if you want to succeed, you can't do it by yourself. You need support from your network. So network is everything. Um, and it's about what you give to your network and what they can give you as well. And I would say that's one of the reasons why I have done sort of a lot of engagement in different organizations and networks and associations, as you mentioned. Because you have to remember that if we take it from the beginning, higher education in hospitality and tourism in Denmark is still very, very young. Uh, our BA degrees are no more than 11 years old right now.
Mhm.
So, well, only a decade that we've been in business on an academic level. Before that, it was certifications or vocational trainings. There have been a few courses on master level from primary universities, but never sort of real focused programs. We have had a couple of 2 years programs in where you sort of get an applied degree, which is also something that we still offer in Denmark. But on an academic level, it's still very young. So when we started up at UCN, and I was so lucky to come back from London and be a part of that startup of our bachelor's program at that time, um, we didn't have any places to look and say, okay, how is it that we do it other places in Denmark? So we had to go international. We
Mhm.
had to go out and engage with other universities, and we started in the UK because the UK has a long tradition for university programs in hospitality, back to polytechnical universities, and that sort of sense in going into higher academia, having PhDs in hospitality and hotel management. Suddenly, I would say when I started, I studied tourism at Aalborg University, our primary university, and that was a program at that time was only 5 years old or something like
Mhm.
that. And I remember the head of the department there was the first professor in tourism, so the
Wow.
first ever tourism professor in Denmark. And people were looking at him. I recall he sort of told me a story at one point saying, so how can you be a professor in tourism? Because tourism was something that people still sort of connected to tour guides and
Sure.
vacations and things like it. It was not a professional
Well, the
area.
joke is always you have a
Uh,
PhD in hotel management, so you're a hotel doctor? What? I
yeah,
don't know.
exactly, exactly. And that also meant that we had to go abroad to find knowledge that we could use, or how to set up things, or find inspiration for that. And I think in the beginning we were sort of looking for what could we copy paste into a Danish context, and we very fast we actually figured out that that was not an option to do
Mhm.
that, because none of us had a PhD. I don't have a PhD today, but I'm still working in higher education and still working with uh, with master programs and things like that as well, but from a development perspective. So we were not that research heavy basically. So we had
Mhm.
to figure out to do something else, and that was sort of the business perspective, strategic perspective, entrepreneurial perspective to things. So we sort of tried to raise the quality of business education
Mm.
within hospitality, because
So it's
at
almost
that point most people and most of the GMs that I engaged with at that point, they were sort of your classical. They started at front desk and then they worked their way up, so they were experts in their own organizations, but none of them had a degree, none of them attended university, none of them had attended school, but they were trained in their position today. So the Danish hotel industry, I would say, and that goes for the restaurant industry today as well, is very much sort of experience focused
Mm.
rather than knowledge focused or based in that sense. And what we're trying to do, I would say, it still needs to be experience based. However, what is needed is that we sort of add a little bit of that knowledge based perspective for development as well. So they
So it's almost
make.
like you're an entrepreneur first. You're a higher education entrepreneur
Mm,
to a certain extent because
yeah,
you're starting this from scratch and you're so vested in the business. I mean, you basically have created it from scratch, like someone that owned a small business would. Um, that's a really interesting perspective on looking at higher education, which is very different. My university's been around for 100 plus years. That the hospitality
mm,
program is relatively new, but so many of the institutions, at least here in North America, are significant in terms
yeah,
of age, and that's good and bad. I think that the downside of that is there's a lot of really ingrained policies and procedures and bureaucracy.
yeah,
The advantage of that, though, is longevity, that we have enormous alumni bases that are all over the world. Um, but there's something very appealing about being able to kind of start something new from scratch and put your own, in your words, kind of a Danish perspective on
yeah.
it.
I think it's what you focus on. What is your KPI? So again, it is business thinking in what we do. If I can go two steps back, I would say that at when we were in when I had my first, I think it was my third year at UCN, I was really sort of searching to get a PhD because that was what all my international colleagues, they were doctors in
Mm,
hospitality management, tourism management, service management, business management, whatever. So I felt it was sort of a pressure for me that I needed a PhD as well. I needed that doctorate to be able to sort of come to that level and say, okay, now we're even peers here, and now we can work together. And I remember my um, mentor at that time, and I still have her, and she's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Um, she looked at me at one point in my search for that PhD and the funding for that PhD. I think I spent 2 years with different funding applications and things like that, and I never succeeded in it. And then she looked at me sort of, so why is it that you want a PhD? And when you get that question and you don't really have a good answer to
sure.
it,
Yeah.
and you
It,
start to get
it, it's
a
answered
little bit
itself.
annoyed that people are asking you questions that you cannot answer, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and then I had to look and say, well, my only valid reply was basically, well, that's because the others have it, right? So
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
I felt like a kindergarten kid at that point.
Sure, and I
Um,
think I
but it,
didn't
but it
fully
opened my. I
appreciate.
think I think what's important here, it opened my perspective to that you need to do something else.
Sure, and I didn't fully appreciate that perspective until so I kind of came up that classical route of, I was living in North America and I hadn't, lived abroad up to, I mean, I was born abroad, but I hadn't lived as an adult abroad. And I remember as I was transitioning from industry into academia, I went to one of my mentors and I said, um, her name was Kathy Nelson, and I said, this is what I want to do. And unfortunately, Kathy's passed away, but she said, you got to get your PhD. And
Mm,
I said, oh, okay. So I assumed that was really the only avenue into higher education. But what the fine print on that statement is you need to get a PhD if you want to go into this type of institution
uh,
and go to work. And I didn't fully appreciate the global landscape of hospitality and tourism education. That there are plenty of absolutely wonderful programs, and there are some absolutely amazing educators out there that didn't go that route, that didn't do the PhD
mm,
route. And it
mm,
doesn't diminish who they are. They're probably more impactful than someone that just has a piece of paper on their wall that says they've
yeah,
got a PhD. PhD doesn't buy you automatic credibility and make you a great teacher. And I can't stress this enough. And I think you go after that degree for a specific type of job and a specific
yeah,
purpose,
yeah.
but it's absolutely not a prerequisite to getting into
Well, I've,
higher
I've seen
education.
I've seen tons of people who have a PhD who are wonderful researchers,
Sure.
and they should really be doing that. But that really sort of falls through in a classroom because
Yeah.
they can't cope with sort of the pressure and questions from students, and the handling of those students and the challenges that they are faced with today. And I think actually based that I never got that PhD have sort of also made sure that we sort of tried to redefine ourselves and figure out what is it that we want to do
Hmm.
at UCN and do something completely different and sort of find our little niche in hospitality management education in Europe and in a global context as well, because uh, we were still sort of playing with the bigger universities and the institutions with a world renowned name as well, and we are just this little snotty business faculty in northern Denmark in Aalborg, which no one have heard of. But suddenly we are actually working together and have partnership with very well known institutions across the globe. And we are very very happy for that, because we really figured out that the partnership that we have is that we're not the little brother in the partnership. People come to us because they want something, some of the things that we are doing, and we look at the people who are coming in or the people that we are uh, out and trying to reach, and look at them and say, what is it that we can give each other to actually lift each other in a partnership? And that's the
Hmm.
most important thing. It's not the name of an institution that is important for us. It's what they can do in the context that we are working with as well. What is it that we don't have that they do well, and the
Hmm.
other way around? And I think that sort of is one of the reasons that we have this success and we become sort of a known institution from Scandinavia suddenly, and especially in a country where hospitality and tourism research and academia it's not a big thing. It's not a huge industry at all.
So, Anders, if you maybe take your academic hat off as a teacher, but you leave that academic hat on now as a industry consultant. So you've done a lot of work with various government entities, hospitality and
Mm.
tourism organizations. A former guest on the podcast, Peter Russell, and the Russell Partnership Collection. You've done some collaboration with him. What role does consultancy and maintaining that relationship with industry through projects, not necessarily for your students, but just for you as an academic? What's the importance of that, and what role does that play in your career?
Well, for me personally, it's quite important because I actually use it as sort of a way to make sure that I have the pulse on what's happening in the industry. And I don't think you learn that from your office at uni. You really need to go out into the field. You need to figure out what's going on. You need to figure out what challenges managers face at the moment. And this is something that I really learned a lot from. And especially as I mentioned to you, that the Danish hotel industry, for that matter, is a very regional industry. It's a very small market, niche market.
Hmm.
So we learn a lot, and I think that goes for a lot of very small countries. Basically, that if you want to succeed, you need to sort of reach out in an international perspective. And I've been so lucky to actually have the opportunity, and UCN giving me the opportunity to actually go out and do these consultancy assignments, where I come out to some of the larger global players in the industry and sort of figure out what is happening out here. And a lot of the things that I see is something that I bring back home and I discuss and pass on to some of the managers that we have here in Denmark and say,
Hmm.
okay, this is what they're working on in or faced with challenges on in Germany, or this is what's happening in China. This is what's happening in the UK. I have a little funny story to that, because I remember I'm always very humble when I go out in these things, and I remember 8 years back I might not have been as humble as I am today, and that was I was creating these long life learning programs for UCN, and we wanted to sort of sell some of these programs to managers in the hotel industry. And I remember the first time I met one of the GMs from one of the larger hotels here in Aalborg, Comwell Mette Bonderup. She's still the GM there.
Great hotel. If you're going to Aalborg, that's where you should stay. I've stayed there. It's beautiful, great location right on the park.
Definitely very, very beautiful and very smiling staff there as well. I remember she looked at me and she said, "So Anders, what do you know about hotels? You never managed one." And that was sort of also what I mentioned earlier, right? You have to focus, you have to recall and remember that it's very experience driven,
Mhm.
the development for Danish hoteliers. And this young kid coming in and say, "Oh, you need this program in order to be better at what you're doing." That was literally, I was shown the door right away.
Mhm.
I can tell you today, Mette is one of the best people I have ever worked with, and we have a very, very good collaboration. And she helps me quite a lot, and I would like to believe that I help her quite a lot as well. So that's where I sort of get my touch on the local industry and the local development as well, working together with them. And we've been so lucky to work with other hotels in the same chain as well across Denmark. So we're very, very happy for that. But as I mentioned, if you want to stay sharp as an educator as well, you need to be out there. You need to see what's happening in the industry, what their challenges are right now, because that's what you bring in to the classroom. And I think that goes very much in line with our learning philosophy here at UCN, where you look at that reflective practice learning. So I go out, I get some practice as well. I get to know what's happening on the floor, the smell in the kitchen, sort of speaking, and come back and say, okay, this is what they're looking at. Then I can go back and look at other types of maybe research to back up some of the things that could help solving some of these challenges as well. And that's what we're combining. So I would definitely, my recommendation is go out there, work together or work in the industry or together with the industry. It doesn't need to be training sessions or sort of that educational part, but I would love to see an university professor go out and work a day on the floor in a restaurant, because
Mhm.
you would
Mhm.
sure hell learn a lot. It's like executive and senior managers. Sometimes it's nice for them actually to go down and face the music and get sort of in touch with their market and operations again in a very practical sense.
Well, it goes back to the statement, at the end of the day, a teacher never stops learning. And I think
Exactly.
you've absolutely embraced that.
Exactly.
Anders Justenlund, you are an associate professor at the University College of Northern Denmark. You have been a wonderful higher advocate for higher education, and I thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for having me.